Hello, everyone. This is our first set of notes for our new virtual learning. And before we left for break, we were doing exponents and radicals and such. And we were getting to the end of that unit. So right now, we're just moving on. So this is the next unit. So it's about polynomials. We're going to get into factoring. Right now, we're going to get into some basics of naming. So the way this is going to work is some of this you might want to write down. I'm going to leave that up to you in terms of how much you want to write notes-wise. You will need a lot of the vocabulary we're going over on your assignment. Once you have finished these notes, you are going to complete the assignment and then you're going to fill in the turn-in form and make sure that you pay attention to what the word of the day is because that's one of the questions on your turn-in form. So for naming polynomials, this is kind of like the basics of vocabulary so we can use it later. So polynomials have two names. It's kind of like a first name and a last name. So the first name has to do with the degree of the polynomial, which I'll talk about first. And its last name is its number of terms, which I'll talk about second. So the degree of a polynomial, that's referring to the largest exponent. So we're going to be looking at the exponents. So the degree and the exponent number are essentially the same idea. If the degree is 0, it's called a constant. If it has a degree of 0, it means that there's no variable. It's something like the number 3 or a -1/2. There is no variable at all. If it has a degree of 1, that means it's linear. So remember, if something doesn't have an exponent, that means it's a 1. So if you just have like an x, or if you had something like a 3y, those both have an exponent of just a 1. A quadratic is an exponent of 2, so something like x squared or a 4x squared. So you can have a coefficient like a 4. What we're looking at is just the exponent on the variable. So similarly, a cubic would be something like x cubed or 1/3 y cubed, so that exponent is a 3. A quartic, x to the 4th, or -2x to the 4th. I'm just making up some examples just so you can kind of see what it looks like. So quintic, we're going to have an exponent of 5. So maybe something like a 2/3 y to the 5th power. Now after 5, we don't have specific names. Anything 6 or above, you just call the nth degree. So for instance, if we had something like x to the 9th power, that's just called the 9th degree. So we would just call it the 9th degree. They didn't want to come up with names for every single thing. So after a while, we just call it the nth degree. The other part of the name is the number of terms that there are. Now, terms are separated by plus and minus signs, and we've kind of seen that before when we add like terms. So terms are separated by plus and minus signs. So if there's only one term, it's a monomial, which means there are no plus or minus signs. So maybe something like 4x, there's no plus or minus sign. Maybe something like 3xy squared. Again, no plus or minus signs, but you can have a coefficient and a bunch of variables being multiplied together, but there's only one thing. A binomial has two terms. So think of the word, the beginning of it is bi. It's kind of like a bicycle. A bicycle has two wheels. A binomial has two terms. So there's going to be two terms. So something like x plus y. So that has the term x and the term plus y. So there are the two terms and they are separated by a plus sign. So maybe something like 4y minus 7z. Those are two terms. The first term is a 4y and the second term is a minus 7z. So that has two terms. A trinomial has three terms, kind of like a tricycle has three wheels. A trinomial has three terms. So we're going to have a couple of plus and minus signs. So for instance, you might have something like x plus y minus z. Those are three terms. The first term is x, the second one is a plus y, and the third term is a minus z. So maybe we could also get something with a little bit more interest. So like 1/2 xy minus 2z plus 4. So that could be three terms. The first term is that plus xy, the 1/2 xy, because there's no plus or minus sign. So that all together is one term. And the second one, go away, is minus 2x, and the fourth one is a plus 4. Now, after 4 terms, we just call it a polynomial. So poly means many, so it's many terms. So just anything has like, if it has 5 terms, it's just a polynomial. It has 10 terms, it's just a polynomial, okay? Now, there's a specific way that you write any sort of polynomial, and it's called standard form. So this is kind of like the grammatically correct way of writing something. So there's a couple things that you do. First of all, you arrange the terms so that the exponents are in order from greatest to least. So the greatest exponent goes first. It's kind of like it's in charge, it has the highest exponent. The least exponent is going to be last. It's not in charge at all. Now, if there's a constant, it is last because its exponent there's like no variable. So it's kind of like it has a degree of 0. So the constants are last. Now, the only interesting thing happens is if there's more than one variable, you think of it in terms of alphabetical order. So if there happen to be like an x and a y, that means that the x is in charge. It's the one that you consider first because alphabetically it is first. If there was a's and b's, you would look at the a's first and rearrange them in order first. If afterwards you have terms that maybe only have a b, they come next afterwards. So it's kind of like alphabetically, whoever's first is in charge and they go first. So we're going to do a couple examples and they're going to look very similar to what your assignment is. So the first thing is going to be putting them essentially in order. If we can combine like terms, we do, and I'll remind you about that as we go. So what I want to do is we're going to write this first in standard form. In this polynomial, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. And if you look at the exponents, none of them match, so none of them are like terms. The exponent that has the highest value is the x cubed, the negative x cubed. So that one's going to go first. So in terms of order, that one's first. The next highest is going to be the 4x squared. So I'm going to put plus 4x squared. The next highest is the negative 1x or negative x. And that constant of plus 15 is last because it has a degree of 0. It has no variables. The constant is always last. So that's one of the things you're going to be doing. Now, if I were to name this, there is a third degree, the degree of 3 is our highest. So we know that this is going to be a cubic. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. And since it is higher than 3, it is a cubic polynomial because 4 or more is just a polynomial. So that is called a cubic polynomial, and it is now in standard form. So let's try this next one. Currently, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. None of the exponents match, so we cannot combine like terms. If I were to look at the highest exponent, it would be the x to the 4th, so I'm going to write negative 5x to the 4th first, so that one is done. My next highest exponent is a plus 4x cubed because 3 is the next number, then a negative 9x squared, and then a plus 4x. So if we look at our exponents, it goes from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. It goes from greatest to least. If I were to name this, my highest exponent is a 4, which means that this is a quartic. So I'm going to write quartic. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So this is again a polynomial because there are 4 or more. Now, when we get into multiple variables, we first have to figure out how many terms we have, just like we did, and see if we have anything that matches. So my first term is the 4xy squared. So remember that's it's plus or minus signs that separate things. So that's one full term. Plus 3, that plus says, here's your next term, is the next term. Then plus 3x squared y, and lastly minus 3y squared. Now, none of those terms match. if you look at the variables and their exponents, this is an xy squared, but this is an x squared y. The exponent's not in the same spot. This is only a y squared that doesn't have an x, and this is just a constant. So none of them can be put together. Now, alphabetically, x goes first. So that means that the x is in charge. So if you look for the x with the highest exponent, that would be this one right here. So we're going to start off with a plus 3x squared y. So that one's done. The next highest x is this one right here, the plus 4xy squared. Now, there's still a term that doesn't have an x, but it does have a y, so that one is next. And if there's a constant, which we do, it is the very, very last. Everything without a variable goes at the end. Now again, the x is in charge, so the highest exponent with an x is a 2. So this is going to be a quadratic. And again, there are 4 terms, so it's a polynomial. Okay? And number 4. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. However, if you look at these terms, these two actually match each other because the variables are both an a, b. So those are going to be put together when we start writing it in standard form. So a does come before b. So alphabetically, a is in charge. So this one, this negative a squared, is going to be first. It has the highest exponent for the a. Then negative 5a's plus 2a's is minus 3 ab's. We are not multiplying or dividing or having a power to a power. This is not an exponent rule. We just leave the variables alone and we say if we have negative 5 of them and then we have plus 2 of them, we have a total of minus 3 of them. The variables don't change. Last, we have a plus 4b squared because it doesn't have an a. We don't have a constant, so we don't have anything at the end. And again, the highest exponent for the a's is a 2. So this is going to be a quadratic. But now we only have 3 terms, so it is a trinomial. That is its first and last name. And last, this is going to be our last one before I tell you guys the word of the day and remind you of your assignment. So we have a couple of things that we can put together. So only have x's right now. The highest variable in an x is an x squared, but we have an x squared here and an x squared here. So if we say we have 3 of the x squareds and we subtract 5 of the x squareds, we have negative 5 of the x squareds. For the x's, we have 5 x's and 1 more x. I'm going to have to charge my pen soon. If we put those together, we have 6 x's. And our very last thing is this plus 2. That's our constant. It doesn't have a variable. It's last. This also has a highest exponent of 2, so it's quadratic. And there are 3 terms, so it is a trinomial. So your word of the day is constant. Remember that a constant does not have a variable. It is just a number all by itself. Any number works, plus or minus, decimals, fractions. Word of the day is constant. So write that down because you will be writing that in your turn-in form. Now your assignment, which should be attached to this whole part of Google Classroom, is the naming polynomials in standard form. It is due Thursday, March 26th. So you've watched this video, you're going to do the assignment, and then you are going to fill in the turn-in form. Part of the turn-in form asks you for the word of the day. Again, that's constant. It asks you to upload a picture or a PDF of your assignment, so make sure you are writing it down either on a separate piece of paper, or if you wanted to print the assignment out, you can. You don't have to, okay? But make sure you get all of those done. They are due by Thursday, March 26th. And one more reminder that I do have office hours on Wednesday and Friday this week, so make sure you know when those are based on that welcome video that you should have already done. If you haven't done your welcome video and the quiz, make sure you do. It is part of your grade. And if you have any questions, you can come talk to me during office hours. You can respond to me on Google Classroom, or you can even email me, and I'm going to put my email down here one more time. so that if you need to get a hold of me, you can. crpusd.org. Do not forget, my first name only has I's and my last name only has E's. Biggest mistake that I come across is people can't get a hold of me because they don't spell my name wrong. Okay, hope all y'all doing really good, and hopefully I'll see you on Wednesday, or I have already seen you on Wednesday, depending on when you watch this video, in our Zoom virtual office hours. Have a great day.